I first moved to Stony Plain 14 years ago, this community was about 9,000 people. Whole subdivisions have sprung up in the time that I've been here. I'm standing here in West Terra. This was a field when I moved here 14 years ago, and there's a whole pile of houses in this area. And as I look across the road, I see Willow Park, and then as I look across the 5th Meridian, I see continuing development in Genesis on the lake. We continue to grow, and it's a great community to be a part of. We have a brand new high school. We've got a great hospital. We share a leisure center with Spruce Grove and Parkland County. All of that makes it an attractive place for people to live. Conservative estimates are that we will be about 20,000 people by the year 2020. And so that's a significant amount of people coming into our community in the next number of years. That leaves us with the question as a church, what will we continue to do to share the love of Christ with our community, to make disciples of people, and to continue to be a church that reaches out and loves its community? Historically, our church has always reached beyond itself. When you look at the response of our church to our community, in 1940 we purchased this land.
Moved out of what they called the Roaring Twenties into the Depression, but as a result of that there was a great movement to spiritual things, but there was no organized church until 1939. The property that we're on right now and where the first church was built on 49th Street, and right on the street, and that's why the street isn't going through, $100 for the 2 lots about, and that was purchased, and that's the first property of the church, and it's still the church here. It was basically a shell, but it also provided living quarters for the pastor. So that was the first church.
2 years later, the church jacked that building up and put a basement underneath it.
And I well remember that because my dad was very involved and very concerned that the thing may cave in because we had a rainstorm at the same time. But it turned out very well.
I thought that was pretty cool. And then in 1961...
this here building. This whole thing cost about $20,000. And this was quite a church then, eh? In 1976, we built the educational wing on this present church.
They built the gym along with offices, and then 1994, we purchased the liquor store.
The big thing on that was not the price we paid. I guess the cost was around $300,000 for the whole thing, but the backing by all the volunteers. They asked me to sort of head up the building, organizing workers and volunteers to come in. It was an exciting time. Electricians came in, they built lights, those were exciting days. And of course the big thing was, it was a liquor store. From one spirit to another. Actually was a vision that the church had at that time of launching out and expanding. And when we bought that property, it also gave us extra parking space, which we really never had here. And that was of course now the parking space isn't adequate again, but it was a vision of reaching out, and even that church, from where it came from, it was easier for people to go to that type of a building. And people did come.
And then this became the space for kids and youth and offices. And so as you look at the church historically, we've always been about reaching beyond ourselves into our community.
There's definitely some challenges in being in 2 buildings and on 3 different floors. Connectivity is lost just based on, where the spaces are and where the people are. I've talked to a lot of people about how exciting it is to see what God is accomplishing within our church and the growth that's happening in our church and what could be accomplished through us with a new facility.
You know what? I've worked with 14 different pastors over the years. 14. And it's been interesting that we stuck to the church here. There were times when we too, Bernice and I, were discouraged and down. But we made up our mind that We're going to stick to it. And are we thankful? Absolutely. It's been the best thing for us that we were able to stick with the church, stay with the church, and I'm so glad that God has not changed. He's been God of the mountains, God of the valleys, God of the hard times and the difficult times, and He brought us through. And it's a joy that to look back and say, God has been faithful, and we've tried to be faithful to what God has committed to our trust.
Back in 2009, our church purchased this 14-acre tract of land. We realized that with the challenges that we were facing with our facility and with the growing population of our community, that we had to do something to address that. We looked at a number of different options, and we felt like the best stewardship option was to relocate our church. This is a 14-acre tract of land that seems like it's in the middle of nowhere, and right now it is. But there is an area structural plan slated for development in this area that's going to house a new school, and there are going to be hundreds of new homes in this area, just like in the subdivision that was a field that is now West Terra, where there are hundreds of homes. This field is going to house hundreds of families in the future, and we want to be a part of the development of Stony Plain. We want to be here as a resident in this area and want to welcome the new residents of Stony Plain and share the love of Christ with them right here. This is ultimately not about a building. This is about the vision of our church, and it's about our desire to continue to reach out to our community with the love of Christ. You know, there's a lot of important business that goes on in a place like this. But I think that the most important business that goes on in Stony Plain is the business of the church. And the reason I say that is because eternity hangs in the balance for people. The Holy Spirit has been at work in our community. Our church began here 75 years ago, and God continues to work here and here in Edmonton. We're here in places like Cambodia. And so the Holy Spirit is not done with our community, so neither are we.